The second chapter is entitled The Presents, and hopefully we'll find out what Godpapa Drosselmeyer made for the children. Let's find out. Kind reader or listener, Fritz, Theodore, Ernst, or whatever your name may be, I must ask you to think as hard as you can of your last Christmas table piled high with gifts. Then perhaps you will be able to conjure up the scene, how the children stood silent with shining eyes, and how after quite some time, Marie heaved a sigh and cried out, "Oh, how lovely! Oh, how lovely!" And Fritz took 2 or 3 rather spectacular jumps into the air. So you can certainly tell they're reminiscing, and they were certainly excited by their actions. The children must have been especially well behaved that year, for they had never before received so many splendid presents. The big Christmas tree in the middle of the room was decorated with any number of gold and silver apples and sugared almonds, bright-colored candies and goodies of all kinds, shaped like buds and blossoms, hung from every branch. But the most startling thing about this wonderful tree was that hundreds of tapers glittered like stars in its dark branches, and the tree itself, shining with an inner light, invited the children to pick its blossoms and fruits. Round about the tree, everything glittered splendidly. No one could even have described all those wonderful things. Marie discovered the prettiest dolls and all sorts of shiny little utensils. And there is the image. Best of all, a little silk dress decorated with colored ribbons had been hung in such a way that she could examine it from all sides. And examine it she did, crying out time after time, "Oh, what a beautiful, oh, what a lovely dress. And I know for sure that I'll be allowed to put it on." Meanwhile, Fritz galloped around the table 3 or 4 times, trying out his new horse that, true enough, he had found already bridled on the table. On dismounting, he remarked that the beast was rather wild, but it didn't matter. He'd break him in. Then he reviewed his new squadron of hussars, who were admirably fitted out in red and gold uniforms with silver sabers and mounts so gleaming white that they too seemed to be of pure silver. When the children had calmed down a little, they got ready to look at the picture books that lay open, showing all sorts of beautiful flowers and people clothed in many colors and dear little children at play, all painted to look as natural as if they were really alive and talking. Well, the children were just getting ready to look at these wonderful books when the bell rang again. Knowing that Godfather Drosselmeyer would be unveiling his present, they ran to the table that had been set up beside the wall. The screen that had hidden it was taken away, and what did the children see? On a green lawn, bright with flowers, stood a magnificent castle with dozens of sparkling windows and golden towers. Chimes were playing, doors and windows opened, and tiny but shapely ladies and gentlemen wearing long dresses and plumed hats could be seen strolling around the rooms. In the central hall, the silver chandeliers had so many candles in them that they all seemed to be all afire, and the children in little skirts and doublets were dancing to the music of the chimes. A man in an emerald green cloak kept appearing at one of the windows, waving his hand and vanishing, and Godfather Drosselmeyer himself, who was hardly bigger than Papa's thumb, would come out from time to time and stand at the castle gate for a while and go back in again. Bracing his arms on the table, Fritz looked for a while at the beautiful castle and the dancing and walking figures. Then he said, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, let me go inside your castle." "Impossible," said the judge. And he was right, for it was foolish of Fritz to think of going into a castle that, golden towers and all, was not as high as himself. This Fritz understood, but after a while, when the ladies and gentlemen continued to stroll back and forth, the children to dance, the emerald green man to appear at the same window, and Godfather Drosselmeyer to step outside the door, Fritz said impatiently, "Godfather Drosselmeyer, come out of the other door next time." "That's not possible, dear Fritz," said the judge. "Then," said Fritz, "make that green man who keeps coming to the window walk around with the others." "That too is impossible," said the judge. "Then make the children come out," cried Fritz. "I want to look at them close up." "No, no, no, all those things are impossible," said the judge crossly. "That's how the mechanism works, and it can't be changed." "Is that right?" said Fritz with an affected drawl. It can't be changed, can it?" "In that case, Godfather Drosselmeyer, if all your precious little people in the castle can do is the same thing over and over again, they don't amount to much, and I don't really care for them. Give me my hussars. They march forward and backward as I command, and they're not shut up in a house." With that, he ran back to the Christmas table and made his squadrons trot this way and that on their silver horses, wheel about, charge, and fire their guns to his heart's content. Marie also quietly crept away, for she too had soon tired of watching the dolls strolling and dancing about inside the castle, although, as she was a good, well-behaved child, she hadn't wanted to show it. Judge Drosselmeyer said rather crossly to the children's parents, "A work of art like this isn't meant for ignorant children. I'm just going to pack my castle up again." But Mrs. Stahlbaum came over and got him to show her the ingenious clockwork that moved the little figures, which meant taking the whole castle apart and putting it back together again. That cheered him up, and he gave the children some lovely brown men and women with gold faces, hands, and legs. They smelled as fragrant as gingerbread, and Fritz and Marie were delighted with them. Sister Louise had been given a lovely dress, which she put on when her mother asked her to, and she looked very pretty in it. But when Marie was asked to put on hers, she said she'd rather just look at it for a while, and she was allowed to do so. Marie's favorite. The real reason why Marie didn't want to leave the Christmas table was that she had just caught sight of something she hadn't noticed before. Fritz's hussars had been parading near the tree. When they marched away, an excellent little man came into view. He stood there quietly, as though patiently waiting his turn. One might have found fault with his build. His torso was too long and stout for his short, skinny legs, and his head was much too big for the rest of him. But to make up for these disadvantages, the distinction of his dress showed him to be a man of taste and breeding. He was wearing a well-cut lavender hussar's jacket with lots of white frogging and buttons, breeches of the same stuff, and the daintiest little boots that had ever graced the feet of a student or even an officer. They were molded as neatly to his dainty little legs as if they had been painted on. Oddly enough, though, in view of these fine clothes, he had, hanging from his shoulders, a skimpy, ungainly cloak that looked almost as if it were made of wood, and he was wearing what appeared to be a miner's cap. But Marie remembered that Godfather Drosselmeyer often wore a wretched-looking morning coat and a hideous cap, neither of which prevented him from being a dear, sweet godfather. And it also occurred to Marie that even if Godfather Drosselmeyer were to dress as prettily as this little man, he wouldn't be as handsome. With Marie, it was love at first sight, and the longer she gazed at the sweet little man, the more delighted she was with his good-natured face. His light green, slightly too prominent eyes were also full of kindness, and his well-curled white cotton beard was most becoming, as it brought out the sweet smile of his bright red lips. Wonderful adjectives you just heard. "Oh, Father dear," Marie cried out, "who does the little dear man by the tree belong to?" "Dear child," said Dr. Stahlbaum, "our friend here will serve you all well. He will crack hard nuts for all of you with his teeth, and he belongs to Louise as much as to you and Fritz." So that means this, her favorite, which is what, everybody, belongs to all three of the children. Carefully picking him up from the table, Dr. Stahlbaum lifted his wooden cloak, whereupon the little man opened his mouth wide, revealing 2 rows of sharp white teeth. At her father's bidding, Marie put in a nut, and crack, the little man bit it into 2. The shell fell down, and Marie found the sweet kernel in her hand. Dr. Stahlbaum told the children that the pretty little man was descended from the Nutcracker family and practiced the trade of his forebears. Marie cried out for joy, and her father said, "Well, dear Marie, since you seem so fond of friend Nutcracker, he shall be entrusted to your special care, though, as I've already told you, Louise and Fritz have as much right to make use of him as you." Marie picked him up, gave him nuts to crack, but she chose the smallest so the little man wouldn't have to open his mouth too wide, which did not really become him. Louise joined her, and friend Nutcracker had to work for them both. He seemed glad to do it, for he kept smiling in the friendliest way. By that time, Fritz was tired of riding and maneuvering. Hearing the sound of nuts being cracked, he ran over to his sisters and laughed heartily at the droll little man. After that, Fritz too wanted to eat nuts. Nutcracker passed from hand to hand and never stopped opening and closing his mouth. Fritz always chose the biggest and hardest nuts, and all of a sudden, crack, crack, 3 little teeth fell out of Nutcracker's mouth, and his lower jaw began to wobble. "Oh, my poor little Nutcracker," Marie cried, taking him out of Fritz's hands. "He's just a stupid fool," said Fritz. "Calls himself a Nutcracker, and his teeth are no good. He doesn't even know his trade, if you ask me. Give him to me, Marie. Let him crack nuts for me, even if he loses the rest of his teeth and his jaw drops off too. Who cares about a good-for-nothing like him?" Marie was in tears. "No, no," she cried. "He's my dear Nutcracker, and you can't have him. See the sad way he's looking at me and showing me his sore mouth? You're a heartless brute. You beat your horses, and you've even had one of your soldiers shot." "That's the way it has to be," said Fritz. "You don't understand these things, and the Nutcracker belongs to me as much as it does to you, so hand him over." Sobbing, Marie wrapped the wounded Nutcracker in her little handkerchief. The children's parents came over with Godfather Drosselmeyer, who, to Marie's dismay, sided with Fritz. But Dr. Stahlbaum said, "I expressly entrusted Nutcracker to Marie's care, which is obviously just what he needs. So there's no point in arguing. She and no one else is in charge of him. What's more, I'm very much surprised at Fritz making demands on a man wounded in the line of duty. As a good soldier, he should know that wounded men are never expected to do active service." Fritz felt deeply ashamed. Losing all interest in nuts and nutcrackers, he slunk away to the other side of the table, where after posting the necessary sentries, he sent his hussars into night quarters. Marie collected Nutcracker's lost teeth and bandaged his wounded mouth with a pretty white ribbon she had taken from her dress. She rocked the poor little fellow, who was looking extremely pale and shaken, in her arms like a baby, meanwhile looking at the pretty pictures in her new picture book that lay there along with the other presents. She grew very angry, which was not at all like her, when Godfather Drosselmeyer laughed at her and kept asking her why she was making such a fuss over such an ugly fellow. Remembering the strange resemblance between Nutcracker and Drosselmeyer, which had struck her at first sight of the little man, she said very gravely, "I'm not at all sure, dear Godfather, that if you were dressed like my dear Nutcracker and were not wearing such shiny boots, I'm not at all sure that you'd look as handsome as he does." Marie didn't know why her parents laughed so heartily, or why the judge went red in the face and hardly laughed at all. There may have been some special reason. The end of that chapter. So, what do you think about the children?